We call many faiths dharmic. What does that really mean? Fundamentally, dharmic faiths believe that we are on a journey of spiritual evolution that can last over various cycles of birth and death. The law of karma and righteous actions govern the progression on this journey. Dharmic faiths believe in the Atman, the soul within each self, and its connection to the infinite absolute. Realizing the oneness and acting in accordance with Dharma will lead you towards liberation. Dharmic faiths offer many paths to the truth. There might be slight philosophical differences between these paths. The Vedantic school of Hinduism contains the essence of all the Dharmic faiths. People mention that Vedanta has many branches, each with its own differences. True, there are many Vedantic schools. Advaitha, Vishishtadvaitha and Dvaita are the most well known. Apart from that, there is Dvaita, Shuddhadvaita, Achintya Bheda, Abheda, and so on. Most scholars believe that Vedantic schools of thought look up primarily to the Upanishads to derive their philosophy. And in fact, more than the Upanishads, they look up to a particular esoteric text. In the ancient past, there existed an enigmatic philosopher called Badarayana. He distilled the wisdom of all the Upanishads and the other scriptures into 555 short verses. This text is called the Brahma Sutra. The philosophers and founders of these Vedantic schools relied heavily on the Brahma Sutra and in fact tried to expand and interpret the meaning of these short aphoristic verses. The Advaitha school of philosophy talks about the infinite consciousness called Brahman and states that everything that you see is part of the Brahman. Realizing the oneness gets one out of the cycle of birth and death. Knowledge leads to liberation. Adi Shankara, one of the finest philosophers and arguably the founder of this Advaitic school, stated, "The world experience is Maya, illusion, the unique power inherent in the Brahman. This projection of the Brahman as the material world causes avidya. Avidya is ignorance of the oneness and erroneous knowledge that we are separate from the Brahman." A famous Advaitic example often cited is the snake and the rope. In the dark, one mistakes a rope for a snake, but once there is light, we clearly see the rope and fear vanishes. Once the illusion is dispelled, we can realize the Brahman. True monism is hard to grasp for most. Vishishtadvaitha, the qualified monistic school, declares that of course, the God energy is infinite, but there is a supreme self, a personal qualified aspect of this Brahman called the Saguna Brahman, the Brahman with qualities. The world is real and part of the Brahman, and so are you. The Atman, the self, is identical to the Brahman, but the Brahman transcends all. And the Saguna aspect of Brahman is differentiated from the Atman. Again, it's all part of the same, but instead of being homogeneous, there is a differentiation in the infinite. Individual souls can retain identities and grace plays an important part. Ramanuja called the Supreme Self Narayana. Now, Adi Shankara, Ramanuja, and of course Badarayana had immense knowledge of all the scriptures, not just the Upanishads. They had knowledge of the Puranas, the Vedas, and so on. So these schools were not in opposition to each other. Some misinterpretations are usually pushed by academicians who do not have a cultural connect with these Eastern Dharmic faiths and who just take a segment of these scriptures, ignoring the others. Going back to Adi Shankara, to get into a very detailed analysis of Shankara and understanding the man himself would take years. He lived only for 32 years, traversed the entire subcontinent by foot and established Dharma. Did he reject the notion of bhakti? Did he reject the notion of qualifications for the Brahman? No, not at all. He built and consecrated so many temples devoted to Shiva, Vishnu, Devi, amongst others. There are stories of Shankara being moved to tears by devotion. Shankara wrote many devotional hymns addressing various manifestations of this god energy. His devotion was not restricted to Vishnu, Shiva, and Shakti. He wrote the Subramanya Bhujanga, extolling Lord Muruga, and Ganesha Bhujanga on Ganesha. He wrote the Gangashtakam and the Yamunashtakam, extolling the holy rivers. Let us take the Subramanya Bhujanga as an example. Adi Shankara composed and sang the Subramanya Bhujanga at the Tiruchendur Murugan temple. His devotion to Lord Muruga and the essence of the god energy Kartikeya is captured beautifully in these verses. He attributes even the song as being formed due to the will of Lord Muruga. He asks Lord Muruga to protect him, and in later verses he implores Kartikeya to come before him. It is said that the god energy Kartikeya did indeed appear before him, but that we will save for another day. Adi Shankara knew that mukti was only achievable in stages for most. This is called Krama Mukti. Most of us want an external entity to guide us. This comforts us. What Adi Shankara meant with his non-dualism is this: once you have gradually moved past all stages of transcendence, you have gone through various cycles of birth and death, finally you realize the supreme self, this ultra-refined aspect of the same God energy, and you're liberated. You still, however, retain your own self. The aim for Adi Shankara post that would be to merge with the Absolute, where all differentiation ceases. God alone exists, and the infinite God energy is the only reality. Again, not much of a difference in the lives of lay practitioners like us who are arguably a bit far from these stages. Qualified monism makes the philosophy more agreeable with the concepts of devotion. The only pitfall of qualified monism is that in practice, it becomes too tied to a name, a proper noun. People get stuck on what name we give to the Saguna Brahman, this qualified manifestation of the Brahman. Qualification should not be a proper noun in my mind, but let's not fight on that yet. The aim is to unite. Now, we come to Buddhism. Buddhism differs on one account, or so people think. This is the concept of Anatta, the doctrine of non-self. Did the Buddha declare the absence of a soul? I have interacted with Tibetan Buddhist monks and a very knowledgeable Theravadan monk on this particular issue. They have mentioned that Anatta is not meant to be taken as a no soul, no self. Rather, it was an exhortation by the Buddha not to fall into the trap of thinking about it. If you think this is my soul, you will fall into the ego trap. And if you think there is no soul, you will get scared. Now, this is very important. If the presence of an individual self is confirmed, then it becomes one with Vedanta. And eventually, when you attain Brahma Jnana, even this differentiation of the self as distinct from the Brahman ceases. This is exactly what Vedantins like Adi Shankara have said as well. I will make a more detailed video where this Buddhist friend and an extremely knowledgeable Theravadan monk would share his thoughts on this topic. Again, if you're a Buddhist and you believe in Anatta, that is fine too. There is no difference in the life of a lay practitioner. In my experience, most regular lay practicing Buddhists in the East do believe that help of the Bodhisattvas is very important in one's progression towards liberation. In fact, I would go one step more and say we are differentiated monists because most believe in the existence of various parts of the infinite God energy, each at a different level of refinement. The realized saints, the bodhisattvas, the various divinities of Hinduism, and the eventual Godhead itself. Now, a note on Dvaita, the dualist branch of Vedanta here. Seeing God as different from oneself is the path of the Dvaitin. But Dvaita, in practice, does not differ from any other Dharmic philosophies at all, because it believes in karma and reincarnation. And finally, the intent of the Dvaitins is not to attain a material heaven, but to be one with God. And Dvaitins do not condemn those who do not worship a particular god to hell either. so very little difference in the life of a daily lay practitioner. And these differences are not actual differences at all. All these schools believed in dharma, karma, and reincarnation. So, karma again played an important role, irrespective of whether the material world was illusory or reality. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa says that based on past life's tendencies, each person has a different outlook, and based on their outlook, they pick these philosophies, and there is no difference between them. Again, all these philosophers, and more importantly, lay practitioners of the faith, believe in aspects of the infinite God energy which are at more refined phases of evolution. The Godhead is at the peak of its potential and can guide us and comfort us and bestow grace when needed. But self-effort is very important, because in Eastern Dharmic faiths, grace does not exist outside of self-effort. Karma and dharma are imperative. Just a side note, Dharmic faiths usually refer to the faiths that arose in the Indian subcontinent, Hinduism and Buddhism being the ones with the largest number of adherents. But I also believe that in addition to the ancient Eastern Dharmic faiths, many other ancient faiths like early Christian Gnosticism, Greek Neoplatonism, Asian faiths like Ruzhao and Dazhao, Taoism and Confucianism, ancient African faiths like Serer and Akan, and other faiths like Yarzani, Yazidi, and the Druze were inherently dharmic. Some of you have emailed me asking me about the Gnostic issue of dualism, and I will address this in the next video. But before you want to type a comment highlighting the differences in all the dharmic faiths, please hear this. All these dharmic faiths have been persecuted by theologies that externalize the God energy. In this age, these minor differences for a dharmic lay practitioner should not matter. The fundamental aim of the dharmic faiths is to transcend the cycle of birth and death. The aim is God realization, the realization of the spark within. What should propel us forward is the unity in these thoughts rather than the high-level philosophical differences. As always, the known is a drop and the unknown an ocean. Peace.